Myst is often thought of as the pioneer of the first-person point-and-click adventure, so much so that the games in that style are often referred to as Myst-likes. But Myst wasn't even the first game to do this, and there were other games made during the same time period that used the same style. Before it, in 1992, came the Journeyman Project, but that game has faded into, well, obscurity. A game that came out in the same year as Myst, The Seventh Guest, is still remembered fairly well. And sold well at the time, but was it good? Well, no. But that was obvious from the title of this video. I'm sure a lot of people would argue that Myst has aged poorly as well, with its slideshow graphics and its actually, I can't really think of a valid complaint besides that. Actually, I don't think having slideshow graphics is even a valid complaint, because I actually love that style, but I think I'm just weird. It might have something to do with the greatness of Riven, though. So, what makes The Seventh Guest such a poor outing in comparison? I mean, it has the transitions when the camera moves through the environment even, as opposed to Myst, which just fades through the pictures. Actually, that aspect sucks too, though. The transitions just make it take longer to move around. Still, that's not really all that big of a deal, since this game is designed differently than Myst. So, The Seventh Guest, unlike Myst, is just simply a series of puzzles, rather than being an interconnected series of puzzles where you have to explore and figure out what to do. No, in The Seventh Guest, you just walk into a room, there's a puzzle, and then you stay at the puzzle for hours until you solve it. This isn't really a bad aspect of The Seventh Guest. I mean, the Professor Layton games are pretty much the same style, and those are good. But it is just disappointing for me, expecting a Myst-like adventure in a mansion. Instead, I just get some stupidly hard, unoriginal puzzles mixed with an incoherent story. So, the story isn't really that important, by the way. Pretty much when you solve a puzzle, you'll see visions of what previously happened in the room, but it all fails to really add up to anything, and most of it is incoherent and quickly forgettable. Now, the actual puzzles are really where the meat of this game is, if the meat was rotten and covered with flies. When I say the puzzles are unoriginal, I mean that a lot of them are just adapted classic puzzles. Things like put 8 queens on the chessboard so none of them could be in the other's path, or that puzzle where you have a grid of red squares and you have to make them all green, but when you touch one it also turns all the adjacent squares the other color. There's a lot of puzzles like that, and you've pretty much seen them before. Compare this to a good game like Professor Layton, which has a mix of classic puzzles and original puzzles. Oh, and the games also have 150 puzzles in them. The Layton games, that is. The Seventh Guest has, like, 20. But just because you've seen a lot of puzzles before and there's only 20 of them does not mean that this game is easy. It's just stupid hard. Professor Layton actually has one of the same puzzles as is in The Seventh Guest. Except 1, it's totally optional, 2, it's worth the maximum number of points, signifying its extreme difficulty, and 3 easier versions of the puzzle come before it earlier in the game. Here, The Seventh Guest just throws you at the puzzle, not telling you anything about how to solve it, and expects you to solve an extremely hard puzzle. Then there's the infamous Soup Cans puzzle, which even has a TV Tropes page named after it. That page is for ridiculously hard puzzles in games, and the Soup Cans puzzle is totally ridiculous. So you're given a bunch of soup cans with letters on it, but none of them contain vowels. There are just a bunch of soup cans with Y's on them. You have to rearrange all the soup cans to spell a sentence, but nothing actually tells you this. It's not as obvious as it might sound either, because it's pretty freaking hard thinking of words and a sentence where everything has a Y in it and there's no vowels. Especially since you had to know what the words tryst and spryly mean. Plus, there are words like shy and sly, which are totally interchangeable in the sentence, but they have to be in the right order. That doesn't make sense. They're the same sentence. But the worst puzzle for me has to be the microscope puzzle. This actually isn't a puzzle, it's a game against an AI. I don't feel like explaining its rules or anything, but that's not really important. The main point is that the developers of the game decided that the AI should decide its next move based on time. But this causes a huge problem for anyone playing the game on a newer computer, since the processor speed is faster, and the AI is going to be much smarter than the creators intended. As a human player on a newer computer, this game is pretty much impossible. I think I played for an hour and the computer destroyed me every time. So how did I get through this section? Someone online actually made a web application just to play this little mini game. Yes, this is so hard, someone actually programmed that. Basically, you can put in what the computer in the 7th guest has for a move into the program, and then the program determines what you should play. I had the program checking 4 moves ahead for each turn, and it was still a close game. It's like playing chess against the world's best computer. It's impossible to freaking win. Sorry. Also, I forgot to mention, there's a hint book, but it's totally worthless. You just click on it, it says something cryptic, and you go in the fireplace and teleport somewhere. It's junk. Overall, the 7th guest is pretty terrible. If there's anything redeeming about it at the least has an interesting atmosphere, and maybe 2 or 3 of the puzzles are satisfying, but most of them are just plain hard and can be solved by brute force, trial and error. Now don't get me wrong now, hard puzzles can be awesome. Go through Riven or Schism without a guide, and you'll feel a smug sense of satisfaction when you finish them. But in the case of the 7th guest, the puzzles aren't cleverly hard, they're stupid hard. You just sort of mindlessly click on things until you randomly come across the answer rather than having to think and plan. And that lack of cleverness, the complete lack of anything resembling satisfaction from finishing a puzzle, and a completely incomprehensible story, is what's truly wrong with the 7th guest.